Greetings, Arizona Cardinals fans. It is the Redbird Reboot here. We've got a great preview coming up for you for the upcoming Dallas Cowboys versus the Arizona Cardinals. We've got, as always, my co-host at Pancake Soul, Marcos Librado, and we're joined here today by Pro Football Network Dalton Miller, who is not just a Cowboys fan, but also helps cover the NFL for at PFN 365. And super excited to have you on, Dalton. How are you doing today?
Fantastic. It's Thursday, obviously, so we got Thursday night football, and I was writing up like storylines for Thursday night football, and I said, I just hope I want one good primetime game so far this year. We haven't really had one. I mean, I think that when you look at the first game of the season, I think it was okay, but like the Chiefs were very up and down in that game. Their wide receivers did not help Patrick Mahomes in that one. And then I think Miami and New England was okay, but New England's offense is just so vanilla that even that game became a little bit boring. The rest of the games have been absolute slop fest. So I just want a good football game tonight. And unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get a good football game on Sunday between the Arizona Cardinals and the Dallas Cowboys. But they're just two teams moving in different directions right now, and that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. The Cowboys are such a longtime rival, and then someone like me may not remember because of how things worked out as far as when the Cardinals became part of the NFC West. But for years, it was an Arizona team in the NFC East. And so as a result, at least, Marcos, you can probably go into more detail, but there is just a huge thing as far as for Cowboys fans when the Cardinals were struggling. It was almost like that game was their Super Bowl each year. And you can probably talk a little bit about just some of the relationship Cardinals fans have had with the Cowboys.
Well, people here in the Valley, if you remember, because the Cardinals moved here in 1988, there was a lot of Cowboys fans that were based on here in Phoenix, Arizona. So, because we didn't have a home team, people had other teams to gravitate to, and the Cowboys were one of those teams. So, during the early parts of the Cowboys playing here in Sun Devil Stadium, there was actually more Cowboys fans here in the stands than there were Cardinals fans. The Cardinals fans had to win over more of the crowd little by little. It's actually funny because it hits close to home. My sister was a Cowboys fan growing up, and now she's a hardcore Cardinals fan. But that's what we mean when I've asked people, why are you a Cowboys fan if you're from here? It's like I never had a team here. My parents were Cowboys fans, so I'm a Cowboy fan.
It's America's team. That's the way it goes. I was born and raised in southern Pennsylvania, and there's the Baltimore Ravens, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Philadelphia Eagles right here in this area. But there are still a ton of Cowboys fans right here as well. It's a little bit weird to see.
Yeah, with the Cardinals, it's a case where we've talked about as their fan base. Arizona's unique location because almost everyone's from somewhere else. Like the 1950s is where we saw most growth. Everywhere else had been around for like 150 years plus worth of history. And then people are like, we're crazy enough to go out there and live in the desert. So that's part of why we would always joke and say, like, when the Cowboys would come to town back at the old days of playing at Sun Devil Stadium, like the Cardinal Stadium hadn't even started to been built yet. It would just be like the Cowboys home game is how it would feel. And we have to say, it may feel like a Cowboys home game to a lot of Cardinals fans there this upcoming Sunday. Not just because of the amount of Cowboys fans, but because of where the Cowboys are. Right now, like they're number one overall in DVOA, which is like the defense value against the opponent, essentially. Just meaning that if you take into account who a team has played and how good they've been, just they've been right now at least one of the top teams in the National Football League. They're first in points per game. Their defense is holding teams on average to 5 points per game through the first 2 weeks. Now, granted, it's been playing the New York Giants and the New York Jets, but it's still very impressive and pretty ridiculous. The biggest thing I think, at least overall, is finding the narrative of the Cowboys this season with offense and defense. Is this really like the best defense in the NFL, or after watching the Cardinals kind of whoop the Giants in the first half last week, is this more of just the opponents that they've played thus far?
No, I think it's definitely the best defense in the NFL. It is, now for going into year 3 with Dan Quinn, there's first of all a lot of continuity on that defense, which is something that you don't get a lot year to year. And I think that with the way that they're built, especially now things have progressed a little bit. You got the issue fixed at CB2 when you brought in Stephon Gilmore. That was a fantastic trade. I mean, anytime that you're able to trade a day 3 pick for an entrenched NFL starter, you should absolutely do it, as long as you don't have to pay them an extortionate amount of money to do so. So that helped that area out. The trade last season in mid-year for Jonathan Hankins kind of fixed the run defense last year. So it's really a defense with no holes, and they have 4, and now with Donovan Wilson coming back from injury, they'll have 5 safeties that can come out and play on the field at the same time if Dan Quinn can somehow get all of them out onto the field, which he tries to do. He plays with 3 safeties a lot. He plays with 4 safeties every once in a while. You're seeing guys come downhill and play in that dime linebacker role. That's something that Jaron Kearse does very well. And a lot of people want to gravitate towards the Cowboys defensive front. Obviously, Micah Parsons, one of, if not the best defensive players in the NFL. But I really do believe that spine of the defense with Leighton Vander Esch, with Hankins, Osa Odigizua, and particularly those safeties is where the real craziness can come out of Dan Quinn, and he can really be multiple on the back end.
Yeah, no, the defense is just crazy. With the Cowboys this year, you lost Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator, but you kept Dan Quinn. The Cardinals actually interviewed Dan Quinn for their head coach position this offseason. He essentially, I think it was the day after the interview, was like, I'm going to go back to Dallas. Cardinals ended up bringing in a rival of the Dallas Cowboys in Jonathan Gannon and some of that Philly defensive and offensive personnel. It really feels like, what's the biggest change that you've seen as far as moving on from Kellen Moore? Because when you take a look at the Cowboys and Jets game, I know the Cowboys are supposedly ranked a bit lower on offense in some of the statistical metrics, but it just looked like a machine versus the Jets. Are there concerns, at least, that they're kind of that's the weak link of the team given the Super Bowl aspirations? Or is this more of an underrated offense where it's just defense is that good? It's that the offense hasn't been bad. It's only just lesser by comparison.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you're going to kind of have to wait until that week 5 game against San Francisco to really know. I don't know how, and that's, I think, going to be the bigger issue with the Dallas Cowboys this entire season. They've really become a team that takes care of business for the most part against lesser opponents. So they don't get a lot of neutral game script going. They get up early, that defense turns the ball over, they get up a bunch of scores, and then they don't really have to push things on the offensive side of the ball, but they have been pushing things on that side in years prior. I think the one thing that kind of caught my attention in the offseason was when Mike McCarthy was talking about Kellen Moore and always wanting to light up the scoreboard. And I thought that he was crazy for saying that, because the entire point of an offense is to score. But when you have a defense like that, when your special teams is one of the best in the NFL as well, you really have to sit back and play a little bit of complementary football and not take as many shots. The Cowboys got into the red zone, I believe, 6 times in this past game, and they were only able to come away with a couple of touchdowns. They kicked a ton of field goals. And I think it was just because they really weren't pushing it, because they didn't have to against that Jets defense. They didn't have to make mistakes and give that offense the ball back, because that offense wasn't going to do anything against their defense. So I think we're really not going to know much until we get into a neutral game script. Maybe that comes against the Patriots. I think that they're a better football team than their 0-2 record would suggest. I don't think that they have a ton of offensive weaponry, but I think that defense is good. So I want to see week 5 against San Francisco, what this team looks like, because San Francisco's defense has been the Dallas Cowboys' Achilles heel for the past 2 seasons prior. So I think if they have a good day against them, if that offense is able to get the ball out of Dak's hands quickly, which I think so far has been the biggest difference, and then finding ways to get CeeDee Lamb open, particularly against man coverage, finding ways to rub guys in the second level and not get offensive pass interferences. They've kind of gotten those little details down that they didn't have when Kellen Moore was the OC.
Are you guys looking past this game? Like when it comes to this game?
Absolutely. and I don't mean to say that, there's obviously the idea of a trap game. I don't see it happening, just because I've seen the attitude of this football team, and it just seems like a unit overall that they're not going to look past it. I think analysts are looking past it. But the one thing that does worry me a little bit, and it comes down to, you look at the roster for the Arizona Cardinals. They're obviously rebuilding. But that defense so far, yes, they gave up 4 straight touchdowns and then a field goal to lose the game against the Giants. But this is a team, and I can't remember who said it on Twitter, they might not be very talented, but they are going to be scrappy. And I think what we've seen from the Arizona Cardinals so far in both of their first 2 games is that defense, not very talented. They obviously don't have their best player on defense right now. They've been scrappy and they have outplayed what you would expect from them so far. So I think, yes, if that offense comes out and that offense isn't as sharp, I think that there's a chance that this could be a lower scoring game than a lot of people imagine. But I think that Cowboys defense doesn't have an off switch.
Yeah. That defense is insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is kind of the value of Dan Quinn? Because I think a lot of people at least have, I don't want to say underrated, but it's a former head coach, at least of the Falcons. Things seem to fall apart in Atlanta. He goes to the Cowboys. They end up adding perhaps the best, maybe defensive player right now in the NFL. And I say that as like a huge Aaron Donald and Nick Bosa advocate and a Myles Garrett fan. He's been sensational. One of the things we know as Cardinals fans that's interesting from that draft year was, if he had fallen to the Cardinals, they would not have taken him. We kind of end up seeing this as more of part of the problem of the Cardinals. Of they probably were looking at him, and I think I viewed him similar to like, hey, he's an athletic player, probably best as an edge rusher, similar to Hassan Reddick. Cardinals probably were like, hey, we're looking at inside linebackers. That's what we need. This is part of why this team has been in a reset and a rebuild. They're missing quite a few players. Like you mentioned, Budda Baker. There's other defensive talents up front. As far as it comes to with Dan Quinn, is this kind of a Super Bowl or bust and that he's going to take on another type of head coaching job? Or is there areas and weaknesses that the Cardinals could potentially go out and attack on this Cowboys team? Because it's hard to see those at first glance, especially as Cardinals fans, about a team that's different from their own.
Yeah, we haven't seen a ton of the multiplicity that we saw last season from the Dallas Cowboys from a coverage perspective. They've been running a lot of man. I think when they believe that they can line up and just run man and bring pressure, that's what they're going to do. And you saw it with the New York Jets with the Garrett Wilson touchdown, the long one over the middle of the field. They're going to give those up every once in a while, but they really want to take the attack to opposing offenses right now, especially when they do have them outmanned. So I think that you're going to see more as the season progresses. I think you're going to see a lot more zone coverage against the San Francisco 49ers when that week 5 matchup rolls around. And I think when you look at Dan Quinn overall, I think that he would be a fantastic candidate for another head coaching job. I just think that at this point, he has this defense. There's continuity with it. And if he doesn't have kind of the perfect storm of opportunity going to that next spot, he doesn't want to take over the Arizona Cardinals and have to go through an entire rebuild. He doesn't want to go to Denver and have to go through a rebuild or try to, go around and work with the waters of Russell Wilson and what he is right now. That's not what he wants to do. If he gets a situation where a team kind of falls apart, maybe a team like out on the West Coast in LA that had a defensive guru that has not worked out for them and has a little bit of talent on that roster, I think that's maybe a situation he would go to. But Jerry Jones is very good at keeping his pieces around, even if they are not at the highest level.
Ezekiel Elliott, that's the one I think of, at least. In some ways, he kept him around, and then at the end of his contract, you're like, okay, like the first start of the contract, great. It was just you backloaded the deal to keep a lot of people. And at the end of the time, everyone's like, hey, like they've got a better running back on the roster behind him, and now we get to see him this year.
But I think the bigger thing with them even is because coaching staffs, because personnel departments don't have a salary cap, Jerry Jones is really able to money whip guys into keeping them around. Will McClay could be a general manager at 25 other organizations in the NFL. He's not the Cowboys general manager because Jerry Jones is the Cowboys general manager, but he holds that not title, but responsibility. And he's okay with it because of the money that he's making doing that in the shadows. That's very much like Dan Quinn as well. Dan Quinn is probably making more money than many head coaches in the NFL right now. And Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones, the Cowboys organization, they understand the value of having Dan Quinn because these Cowboys defensive players, Micah Parsons has already said it. If he goes somewhere, Micah Parsons would not think twice about going and following Dan Quinn wherever he goes. These players love Dan Quinn, and the Cowboys value that a lot.
Yeah, it's great to hear at least that things are going well in Cowboy land. They've been really rough in Arizona land. Like you said, we've seen this gritty team that has been there for the most part, but a lot of the narrative this week has surrounded Kyler Murray and some of the long-term future. I think people last week were able to see a bit of why the Cardinals chose to go with Josh Dobbs. Has a long rushing touchdown, goes up against the Giants, and we're talking about this Giants team that, of course, is a Dallas divisional rival that gets outscored 60-0 in the first half. We're thinking, oh, this is, flipping that narrative. Everyone came into this season saying the Cardinals are tanking for a new quarterback. They're going to be at the number one pick. And then halfway through that game, it's, oh, yeah, the Giants, that's the team that may be going for the number one pick. They're way worse than anyone expected. And then in that second half, they basically score on 5 of their last 6 drives at least. And Cardinals were not able to really come up with more than one touchdown there. In the midst of this rebuild that's happening with Arizona, are there building block players, building block pieces on the coaching staff, or at least things of what is kind of a success for Arizona look like? Obviously, unexpectedly winning would probably be the biggest portion of that. But as far as with looking at this of less like a tortoise in the hare conversation, I think we can kind of agree that it would be more Dallas maybe blowing the opportunity against a less talented team if that ends up being the case. But what are some of the building blocks or what success would look like for Arizona against this Cowboys team?
Yeah, I mean, I think just kind of performing the way that they have in the first 2 weeks of the season, I think that they've definitely surprised me with both of their performances. Obviously, they had Washington first, and then they had New York in the next week. And I think Washington is a team that, especially offensively for the Arizona Cardinals, could have given them a lot of trouble because that defensive front in Washington is so good. I think when you look at them overall, as long as they're able to battle, and even though they gave up obviously the big lead against the New York Giants, that Giants football team was a playoff team a year ago. And yes, things don't look very good for the Giants right now, but they very well could be a playoff team again this year if they can fix some of their offensive line woes and get Saquon Barkley back healthy. They're starting 2 rookie defensive backs on the outside. I think that that's going to, take some growing pains. They need to get Kayvon Thibodeau going defensively as well. But they have some talent there. So I think just competing for the Arizona Cardinals is kind of where they want to be right now. This is a roster that obviously they Monty Ossenford has gotten rid of a couple of pieces so far. He has really embraced the rebuild. He has absolutely stockpiled draft capital in this draft and the next draft as well. I think that what I've seen from him so far, getting rid of some of these contracts, getting rid of DeAndre Hopkins, it makes the team worse right now. But much like in Minnesota with Kwesi, I really think that they are finally figuring out, like, listen, a lot of these teams go year to year with the way that they build stuff. And we want to build for not just now, but for the future specifically. I don't know where Kyler Murray fits into that. I don't know if they're going to be good enough to be outside of the position to maybe draft Caleb Williams or Drake May. And when you can do that on a rebuilding team with a staff that didn't draft Kyler Murray, and you can for sure get a first round pick, if not more for him, even though things haven't been incredibly pretty with Kyler Murray so far young in his career, I think that that's the direction they would probably go with it. I don't know how they feel about him internally right now, but that's kind of the way that I would look at it. When it comes to building blocks on this football team, Budda Baker's obviously the one that we're looking at. Outside of that, Paris Johnson at right tackle. I'm so glad. I mean, there was talk early on in the process that he might play a little bit of guard, might be one of the guards. I'm so glad that they just put him at tackle and didn't even mess with putting him on the interior.
They tried him out there. We were very content to say that he was going to be the right tackle. We just didn't know if the veteran Kelvin Beachum was going to start over him.
That's what I was worried about.
He's been very impressive through the first 2 weeks, and it's not that there's any slouches in the pass rush.
Yeah. So I'm excited about those two guys specifically. I definitely, kind of selfishly want Budda Baker to be on a contending team, but we've seen him as the centerpiece of this defense. And 2 years ago on a defense that wasn't much more talented than the defense you're looking at right now, that ended up being top 10 in defensive EPA for the entire season. So this is a unit that the pieces that they have had around have been able to kind of overperform outside of, or relative to the expectation for the football team. And I think that just goes back to that attitude defensively. They are scrappy, and it's kind of fun to watch.
Hey, I'll say this as far as our defense is concerned, because I'm more of a person who's concentrates more on the defensive side. We did have some pieces together, and the situation was that our defensive coordinator was more of that defensive coordinator who, if you played with the lead, that helped our defense to be able to not have to go up against the run, which is one of the weaknesses they had, and they were pretty well being able to defend anything being thrown in the air. So any air yards, any passes over, like his philosophy was keeping everything under like 5 to 10 yards and whatnot. So defend the deeper part. So basically playing prevent defense the entire game if the offense was able to get a lead. But once that defense had to go up against a team where we didn't have a lead, well, that's when you saw the things kind of fall apart. But it was more of the philosophy that did that. But I'll tell you one thing, the talent has been so underrated here when it comes to the Cardinals. I'm not saying that as a homer. I'm saying that just looking at it from a piece-to-piece standpoint, you don't have stalwart names, but that's because the Cardinals, let's be honest, they really don't get much when it comes to like media coverage. Even when we were playing at the highest level, it took till week 6 till we beat the Rams, and even after we beat the Rams, for us to finally get that number 1 spot, the national media just did not want to put us at the number 1 ranking, even though we deserved it.
Yeah, and I was definitely one of those guys, and then I moved Arizona up in those power rankings a couple of years ago, and they responded by kind of falling apart in the second half of the season. But
yeah. It was fun, and it was one of those spots where everyone's like, all right, we're 7-0. It's like probably about time for them to have that huge moment. Even once, I think it was 2-1 with Colt McCoy playing a solid game. And then the Cardinals come back, and then it's no J.J. Watt, no DeAndre Hopkins, a very top-heavy team. They go out and run it back. And I think like you're bringing up a great point, I think, though, Marcos, on how right now, if you wanted to look at, and you wanted to say at least what do Dennis Gardeck and Micah Parsons have in common, they're tied right now, 3rd in the league with 3 sacks through 2 games, which is kind of surprising, I think, to a lot of people, because no one's really aware of who Dennis Gardeck has been outside of that 1 year in 2020 where Chandler Jones goes down. He ends up with 7 sacks on like 90 snaps. It's not a player that I think, at least, that you say is going to be one of those guys who, like, obviously is a household name. And even with the Arizona Cardinals, you take over Kaiser White, they're kind of been hit by the injury bug in a way where Dallas is at least a bit healthier. But I think that like that overperforming according to expectations that we've at least seen thus far is something that probably is a positive, because to me that at least says that this is a team playing hard for their coaching staff, something that J.J. Watt, I believe, remarked last week. And we've seen how this is not an Arizona team that's going to win a lot of games, but there was so many questions, not just about if Kyler Murray was going to make it or be able to see some level of success in the NFL, but at least with the coaching staff, you get the feeling, at least, this is a Cardinals team that went after someone like a Mike McCarthy, that interviewed a Dan Quinn. It's just not really an organization that can compare to the Star in a lot of ways. So the hope I think you would have is, did the Cardinals kind of get something kind of right with Jonathan Gannon and the staff that's been under there? Or is this kind of a place of, as Cowboys fans looking at Jonathan Gannon, looking at the preseason, like, are we talking about more of this honeymoon period that's maybe going to fall out in the next few years? Because that really, I think, what Cardinals fans, a lot of them are looking to that 2024 draft with all the picks that Monty has acquired. Do you think that the coaching staff of the Arizona Cardinals, have we seen enough in the first 2 weeks that we can say, hey, like, this is something we can build on? Like you talked about, if the Cardinals can at least be competing where it's not a 30-10 blowout, but maybe more of like a 27-18 style game. Is that going to be the win for this Cardinals team, and knowing that the coaching staff is there? Or is this more of just Cardinals fans, we played a couple of bad teams, we're going to play the Cowboys now, get smoked, and a lot of people are going to start talking about same old Cardinals, versus seeing some real changes that, at least from what I've seen in watching the film and seeing how the team is playing, it does feel like there is at least a little bit of a change in Arizona that, let's hope, it could be sustainable.
Yeah, I think when I look at it, it's a really young and inexperienced coaching staff. And what I want to see more than anything is for this coaching staff to have a legitimate chance to see that roster improve with all this draft capital that Monty has brought in, because we've seen it in Houston with 3 head coaches in 3 seasons on a team that you knew the entire time was going to be bad. So why hire somebody if they're not a part of your long-term plan at head coach? As long as you go into it and say, listen, Jonathan Gannon, no matter what happens this season, is going to be our guy moving forward. This isn't a Denver Broncos situation with Nathaniel Hackett to where it's a team with a veteran quarterback you expect to be contending in the AFC. That's not what this team is. It's in a rebuild. They understand that. It is a young and inexperienced coaching staff, but it's a coaching staff that through 2 games, like you said, we've seen some very good things from this football team. You know, even though the Washington Commanders and the New York Giants are better football teams, the Cardinals had a chance to win both of those games against teams that, if you look at any survivor pool, the Washington Commanders and the New York Giants were picks in weeks 1 and week 2 because they were playing the Arizona Cardinals. And my dad is one of those guys who picked both of those teams, and he was sweating both of those weeks because the Arizona Cardinals outplayed their expectation. And like you said, if this Cowboys game ends up being 28-17 and it's, 21-10 going into the fourth quarter, that's kind of a win because this Dallas Cowboys team might be the best in the NFL, period. So I think that any close kind of contest here, anything that avoids the embarrassment that was week 1 with the Giants and the Cowboys, I think is a win.
I mean, we would have to at least outperform what the Giants did in week 1. So at least getting a touchdown there, that would actually signify at the very least we did better against the same opponent somewhat, as long as we didn't give up 40 points and score a single point against them. So that's something to at least have as a somewhat of a measurement. I have a question for you. There's rumors swerving. It's not actual rumors. It's just little talks in here and there. But Kyler Murray's a Texas guy through and through. Has there ever been that talk between the Texas community about maybe wanting to have a situation where Kyler Murray comes over to be the Cowboys quarterback because of the fact that he has a history of just being undefeated in AT&T Stadium?
Yeah, and I also think too the fact of the matter is too, when you talk to Cowboys fans, either they love Dak or they just despise Dak. It's one of the funniest things to me because I'm like a Dak fan, and so there's a lot of people like, oh, Dak threw the most interceptions, like moving on. Like we've heard a lot of those, like whether you call rumors or just the natural connection that people have for Kyler being a previous Texas guy and the high standard that Dak Prescott has as the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, there's a bit of a complicated relationship with Kyler Murray and the Texas area, the North Texas area in general, with him, with his father. And so I don't know. I think the people from Allen, for sure, would like to see Kyler Murray be the Dallas Cowboys quarterback. And maybe, it would happen if, there was, hopefully not, but like a catastrophic injury to Dak Prescott to where he could no longer go and they had to go out and find their next quarterback. I don't think because of, based off of what we've seen from Kyler Murray so far, that anybody would choose to have him over Dak Prescott, even with the physical gifts that Kyler Murray has. Kyler Murray, there's no denying it. He has a better arm than Dak Prescott. He is a freaky athlete when it comes to his quickness. I mean, it's unbelievable how well he moves. But I think when you look at the Cowboys and when you look at Dak Prescott, the mental side of the game, the leadership that he brings. I mean, this is a guy who has a master's degree in business leadership. I mean, it's what he does. I don't think that you can kind of top that. On top of the Dallas Cowboys quarterback has that responsibility. You have an image that you need to portray. And I don't think right now, and this could change, and Kyler could become a little bit more mature in the way that maybe he doesn't handle himself but by the way that he presents himself, to where he could get to that point. But I don't think that he is there right now. And I think because of the somewhat complicated relationship that he has with the Texas community, with Texas A&M, with going to Oklahoma, with playing in Allen, I think that it wouldn't be something that people really look towards. I think that there's a couple of other guys, Matthew Stafford being one of them, that Cowboys fans might gravitate towards even more.
Oh wow, Matthew Stafford
Highland Park
and his litter 8. Well,
Yeah.
I mean,
He's
I
from
guess
Texas.
part of that,
That's another
yeah,
thing.
I guess part of that would just be just the fact that like he has a Super Bowl under his belt, so I guess that can kind of make sense in that aspect. I just always was curious about that because Kyler Murray would, especially for his first couple of years in the NFL, would travel back to Texas to have his like training camp, and he would travel back there constantly. And I have a friend who's a writer. Obviously, you know him, Blake Walter Mitchell, who has like put out some things saying like somewhat of like, hey, if Kyler Murray, if it doesn't work out here with Arizona, I think he's going to try to force his way out to go to the Cowboys organization. Like he wants to make a pitch over there. And just the fact, like I said, he has such a history at the AT&T Stadium. I don't think that's going to happen. I think he's already been committed to this organization. So to me, it would be a question of if it works here, it works here. And it would just be like, hey, he's not really trying to force his way out of it, like into another team. It's just, we just got to see how he develops with his new offensive mindset.
Yeah, I don't know how it's going to go. It's going to be really interesting because this offense is a lot different than what we saw with Cliff Kingsbury, and it's going to be there will be a transition period with Kyler Murray in that offense specifically, and I think it's kind of been fun to watch Josh Dobbs, who never really got a shot to be a starting quarterback in the NFL for the most part, and played, I think, kind of decently. When he was with Tennessee last year, that was a team that had an absolutely atrocious roster at that point where he was playing. So I think that, with an offensive line that is a little bit better than I think a lot of people realize in Arizona. I think Froholt is one of the most underrated centers in the NFL right now, at least from what I've seen from him. DJ Humphries is the guy who, at left tackle has been a good starter in the NFL for a long time. And then Paris Johnson at right tackle. Will Hernandez is a guy who, never really worked out in the way that we wanted him to coming out of UTEP, but is a fun player to watch is the way that I will say it.
He's been there. He's been really good. This season was good last season. It's been really interesting as far as like the Cardinals, for some reason, like we said, we're like the home for former Giants failed draft picks because we took on Justin Pugh as a stalwart for us for a number of years. He is not retired, but has just not gotten another contract, was injured all of last year. And Will Hernandez has actually been solid. He missed the end of last year. But like you said, the offensive line has not been a weak point on the team like it has been, I think, for other teams that are vying for some of those top overall picks, such as I think that they traded away Josh Jones. So some people have said, hey, maybe he could start at left or right tackle. He obviously is not going to be on the team once they go out and trade back up for the 6th overall pick in Paris Johnson. And he's just has struggled as a starter with CJ Stroud. There's just been, I think, as far as what we've seen in Arizona, it hasn't been a disaster class on the field that I think many people have expected it to be. But
no, it's been way better.
It's been a lot better. It's just that the team, like last week, we saw Cardinals come out playing a lot of quarters coverage, being able to essentially take away some of what we saw with the Giants over the middle. And in that second half, they adjusted and Daniel Jones used his legs a whole lot more. Cardinals just were not able to stop some of the bigger weapons like Jalen Hyatt, Burns, their cornerback one, Marco Wilson, which we can talk about as far as the matchup, because they essentially could not stop them in the second half. And it was more of that way, came out punching harder than anyone expected. And when the Giants counterpunched, they just had a much stronger punch, much better boxer. Arizona was just not able to effectively be able to deliver a knockout blow on offense or defense. And one of the things I think that would concern me this week is you got 4th round pick Marco Wilson's essentially your top corner. They've gotten pretty good play out of a 6th round pick in Keitrell Clark on the outside, but there's a different wide receiver one in CeeDee Lamb that we've been able to see, and it's also a veteran quarterback. It's not Sam Howell that you're playing, or the Giants running their offense without Saquon Barkley now. you're going to have a guy that a lot of Cardinals fans, myself included, felt should have been an Arizona Cardinal back in the 2020 NFL draft. Kyler Murray was stumping for him. And the response that the GM at the time, Steve Keim, said was, hey, like, this is, you can't just, draft all offensive players, can't go on one side of the ball. He takes Isaiah Simmons, who was on the opposing Giants sideline for a 7th-round pick. Meanwhile, Kyler Murray was stumping for, I think it was, if not CeeDee Lamb, then for Tristan Wirfs, trying to get that offensive tackle. We've seen that the Cardinals and New Brass, it seems like maybe not listening necessarily to Kyler Murray, but they've gone out and been able to address issues on the offense that Steve Keim simply did not. And so a lot of Cardinals fans, it's like we watch CeeDee Lamb making plays for the Dallas Cowboys. He falls all the way to the 17th pick. And it's like, that should have been like our guy out there making plays and taking over for DeAndre Hopkins. And now instead the Cardinals, we get Hollywood Brown, and he's probably not going to be extended, at least not during the season. And depending on how his play goes, Cardinals may end up having to take a receiver with one of those top draft picks just to kind of get that number one player in tow. Tell us about CD as far as, is there anyone on this Cardinals team that is able to stop him? Because if Brandon Cooks isn't playing this week, it really feels like I would almost try to double Lamb, maybe see if you could address Jake Ferguson, but I don't know if there's a Cardinals cornerback who can really stop him one-on-one in coverage, especially with how he's playing right now.
Yeah, CD has obviously always been incredibly talented. He just needed to kind of find that consistency. Last year, especially early on, there were a lot of miscommunications between him and Dak Prescott, led to a couple bad interceptions. But he was fantastic towards the end of the year last year, and I think that he's really kind of started to cement himself, and it's really difficult to really rank all of these wide receivers in the NFL. I try to do it every single week for Pro Football Network, and I fight myself through the entire process because there's so much talent at that position. But he's kind of establishing himself as a top 5 guy in the NFL right now, especially with guys like Jamar Chase not producing quite as much over the past, 12 months or so since his rookie year. I think you're really starting to see CeeDee Lamb separate himself and be that elite number one guy that we always kind of thought that he could be. I think that this scheme specifically is going to do a very good job of finding ways to get him the ball, creative ways to get him the ball. And yes, without Brandon Cooks, I think that you do spend a little bit more attention on him. I think that you do try to, obviously quarters is kind of just a general way of talking about a 4-high 3-under defense, but there's a lot of different things that you can do in a quarters based zone coverage to add extra help to a guy like CeeDee Lamb, especially if he is lining up in the slot, because there's a lot that you can do to poach guys like that. So
Right.
It'll be interesting to see how they're able to kind of double him and see if they're able to goat Dak Prescott into making a mistake over the middle of the field. We saw last year Eddie Jackson in Chicago jump a pass from him over the middle of the field. If the Arizona Cardinals are able to get a turnover or two from Dak Prescott, it would be huge for their defense and huge for their offense to get a short field against the Cowboys defense. But yeah, I mean, CD's been fantastic, and I'm going to do my best not to absolutely destroy Steve Keim because he doesn't deserve that from me right now.
We've taken plenty of time of destroying him in the offseason. You don't need to add any more for the most part, but it's
it is what it is. I mean, I'll just say that Kyler Murray kind of had a point there. I think that when you compare, especially a guy like we saw with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, when you compare a guy that has that relationship with somebody coming out of the college level, I think that it is huge if you are able to do that. And then, like you were talking about, with maybe having to draft a wide receiver early, there is no better time to have to draft a wide receiver than to have Marvin Harrison Jr. staring at you with that second pick in the NFL draft. So if that happens, and I'm a little bit biased because I do think that if they have the number 1 and number 2 pick, or 1 and 4, whatever they end up with, if that is the case, pairing Caleb Williams with Marvin Harrison Jr., just at the NFL level, it could be here, it could be in Chicago, I don't care. I just want to see those two together because they are two of the best prospects I've ever watched.
I have to say something about that CD pick. Well, the way you guys are utilizing him is way different than what I think we would have utilized him here in Arizona.
Agreed.
So we made the trade, obviously, for DeAndre Hopkins right before that. I knew that at that point that signified that they were probably not going to go wide receiver, even though they probably should have. And I'm an Isaiah Simmons truther. I think Isaiah Simmons' development was botched from the beginning. I think he had a tumultuous.
It's just Keim. It's just Keim doing Keim things and drafting a guy who is a little bit of a hybrid and playing him at the wrong hybrid position. That's
Well,
it's what he did with Reddick. I mean, it's what he did. I think that Zaven Collins, I had him as an edge rusher. I thought that he would be a great edge rusher coming out. And then they, put him at off-ball linebacker. They put Simmons at off-ball linebacker. And I just think that there's better spots for each of these guys. And I think that we've seen Zaven Collins rush the passer a little bit, and it's been fun.
Well, Simmons has been playing like he hasn't been playing the same actual position since he's come out. Even in his first year, they put him at safety and edge a lot of times. The second year, he played off ball, and he went over like 100 tackles for the first time. Kind of, put up quite a bit of turnovers, especially being able to force those fumbles. And of course, he had that great play against the Cowboys when we played in the stadium when he took on Zeke Elliott on that block. But aside from that, like the misutilization really is the issue when it came to Steve Keim. Now, could he have drafted CeeDee Lamb? Yeah, absolutely he would have. But the way you guys are utilizing him is a lot different than what they would have utilized him, and whether he would have had that same success. He's a slot over with the Cowboys. And so he attacks more of that middle by running more of those middle posts or sitting in that middle zone, right between the linebackers and the safeties. And he's had a lot of success. And like you just mentioned, there were a bunch of miscommunications. But yeah, I was a CeeDee Lamb person too. But I mean, I'm not going to go and hit him too hard for that, because consensus wise on the board by that time, it's different. And of course, hindsight's always 2020. But yeah, we could have had CeeDee Lamb. But now if we can rectify that by getting Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah. And I loved Isaiah Simmons coming out. I thought that he was going to be an absolute baller. And I still don't think he's been an awful NFL player. It just didn't work out, with Jonathan Gannon coming into town. They felt a new spot would be best for him, I guess.
Yeah, and it's really interesting as far as with how the team building happens, because that's the big debate in Arizona right now. Clearly, through the first few weeks, we've seen the Cardinals. They're probably not the worst team in the NFL. We don't even have to go into anything with the Bears, because it would take a whole separate podcast on it. But as far as their schedule goes, they are in the NFC West, where unfortunately for like those Cardinals fans who are hoping that maybe we're not the worst team in the NFC West, Matthew Stafford has just basically taken Puka Nacua and turned him into a darling of fantasy football right now. The Seahawks look like they at least are able to get a great win over what seems to be another playoff team in the Lions. And of course, we get to play the San Francisco 49ers the following week, and then you guys get to play them right after us. So we may be kind of the team that we're hoping, hey, they'll gloss over us looking ahead to the Cowboys. But from a team building standpoint, I did want to at least share just we've had a lot of people have questioned the Cardinals moving off of Kyler's contract and other pieces. I think that the way that things have been at least set up for Arizona, and this is maybe one of the areas you can credit Steve Keim for, is just a quick kind of comparison where it comes to with Dak and others. Kyler right now, if the Cardinals end up in a spot where they can move on from him, and I've said I have no issues whether it's moving on or keeping him as far as it goes, because we've seen him produce. I think that when you've got another quarterback, that comes in there as far as Caleb, you almost would be like, you have to be picking in that spot before you can talk about it. But people were loving to project. You're talking about, if they did trade him, it's about $46 million in dead cap, which is huge. But I've found it crazy that people have talked about as far as with Dak Prescott and the Cowboys in that same area. If they were to say, oh, we didn't make the playoffs, we didn't win a Super Bowl, it's like $61 million in dead cap at least. And you're also looking at, if there's maybe 2025, you're at least going to be clean. The one that's interesting to me is the Broncos with signing Russell Wilson. They really have kind of married themselves to the quarterback overall, but you'd have to trade him, which no one's going to be probably trading for Russell Wilson. Some of the releases, it does feel like Arizona, at least the contract that Kyler has, they have that flexibility of they could move off if it made sense. Whereas with Dak and Russ, and of course, obviously, we're not even going to talk about the Deshaun Watson contract. There's a lot more issues that are going to be there. I think the biggest thing with Cardinals fans is we have an unknown with Kyler Murray that's coming up. I've made the point of pointing out that when Dak Prescott came back from his ankle injury, we got to see him become a much more explosive passer in a lot of ways the next season. He ended up actually finishing with about almost 4,500 yards as a passer. Had about a similar, I think it was, as far as yards per attempt to where he was. He'd been running around the year before. when Dak came back, we actually can see at least where the injury took place. He was probably rushing for about 17, 18, 19 yards a game. That took a hit the year that he came back coming off of that ankle injury. Do you think that's something the Cardinals fans should worry about if Kyler Murray, and he tweets out a TikTok video that says soon? I just don't think he's going to be the same rusher coming off of injury. And is that a spot where is he going to have to like really develop a lot more as a passer, or are we talking about like this is going to be just the Cardinals scheme with Cliff Kingsbury holding him back? Like, what are we to kind of make of Kyler coming back into this new place and scheme, especially looking at it from a outside perspective? A lot of people have questioned if he's going to be able to make these timing throws over the middle, deep play action in the pocket. It's going to be really interesting because a lot of the similar complaints people had about Kyler, I've seen leveraged with Dak, and we saw Dak overcome a lot of those in Dallas.
Yeah, I think when it comes to Kyler, I think the work over the middle is the biggest thing for me. And that's just something it might end up fixing itself. It might not. His height might be a legitimate issue when it comes to throwing the ball over the middle. And I hate to say that because I don't think height is a huge issue for many quarterbacks. We saw Drew Brees live with it forever. I think what we see with a lot of these quarterbacks, a lot of these young quarterbacks who are very athletic, is that they have that trump card. So they don't develop as quickly when it comes to the finer points of being a passer. When Dak Prescott's ankle snapped in half, he had to learn very quickly that this is how he had to do things now. He was not going to be able to create in the same way that he was able to beforehand. And I think when you are, because there is nobody in the league for my money who is just quicker on their feet than Kyler Murray. Watching him run is unbelievably entertaining because he is a little bit smaller, but his feet are so incredibly fast. And I think that he'll still have about the same explosion as he did. I mean, everybody obviously heals a little bit differently. I just hope that the injury and his propensity to run around and try to make plays instead of staying on script and staying on schedule and delivering passes over the middle of the field. I hope that this injury has made him evolve a little bit as a passer so he doesn't have to lean on his athleticism as much.
You're absolutely right when it comes to that. A lot of, especially athletic quarterbacks, they tend to just scramble and leave the pocket as soon as they can. That's actually a problem that Patrick Mahomes had at the beginning of his career, where he would just like backpedal to try to buy time, which made those rush pass even straighter coming towards him. And it kind of like it would drive you nuts when you would see that. Like, stop doing that. Like, either throw the ball away or just hang in the pocket. That way your tackles can do their job better at being able to protect you from those edge rushers. You have to learn that little by little. But of course, he still does the same thing. He still runs out of the pocket, finds the wide open receiver, and delivers the ball. But when
you're Mahomes, you can get away with not a lot, not just a ton because of your arm, which I think is similar with why people testify with Caleb Williams, who were the Cardinals. They got away with essentially having poor offensive line protections, maybe not the talent necessarily, but just like there would be a lot of free rushers that would come at Kyler Murray in Cliff Kingsbury's scheme, and he'd be able to pick those up. And I think we've also seen Patrick Mahomes be able to improve in time as the Chiefs moved to a new run heavy between the tackles, being able to use some of that deep play action on the offense because teams just started attacking all of those tendencies and he had to learn and adjust. Do you think that Kyler can make that same type of learning and adjustments?
I do think that you can kind of learn it and grow from that. I think just as you can learn and grow from it, I think having a bunch of time off of the game can stunt your development as well. I think that's part of what you're seeing. And there's probably other issues going on in Cleveland with Deshaun Watson right now. But I mean, the dude did not play for 700 days. And he looks legitimately terrible now. He seems like he has no clue what is going on in the pocket. He is panicking every single time he drops back to pass. And that's what you hope doesn't happen after the injury with Kyler Murray. As long as he comes back and is mentally tough enough to say, hey, this is what happened. This is what I can do to avoid that happening again and learn and grow from it instead of kind of living in that fear of, oh, this could happen again. I think that he can learn from it. And I do think that a player like Kyler Murray with a more under center play action heavy attack, it takes away some of the issues that he has with, spread them out and really pick defenses apart over the middle. I look at it like I look at Ryan Tannehill. Ryan Tannehill is not a drop back passer. He's never been a just pure drop back passer. But when you put him in play action, when you turn his back to the defense, he can snap it around. He knows that defense, that front that front seven is going to creep towards the line of scrimmage. He knows how to attack over them underneath safeties, use guys that are coming across the field. That's what he does very, very well. And I think that's what you can get from Kyler Murray. It's a way that you can attack the middle of the field without having to just spread guys out and ask him to really pick defenses apart in zone coverage over the middle.
Definitely. Let's take a look real quick at just some Cowboys film. So this is just a play that we have, I believe, against the Jets from last week, just showing at least some of the pass rush ferocity that they are able to have. This is the Zach Wilson completion for first down, but it's the next two plays that I think tells a lot of the story of the Cowboys defense. So it's 1st and 10, ball at least is on the 39. Cowboys are up, obviously. This is at least a run play where you can watch just the explosiveness that's there of the Cowboys defense on the screen, with Micah Parsons being able to make a tackle for loss just on a, he hands the ball off, he picks it up, at least they end up running the ball back. I don't remember if the play was blown dead or not, but it's just the physical nature, at least, of this Cowboys attacking defense is just crazy to be able to watch.
Yeah, the play wasn't originally blown dead, but they reviewed it, and it ended up that Dwayne Brown was touching him when Micah's knee was still down. But you can really see from the wide angle, especially Micah kind of taking the tight end and shoving him back into the backfield. Micah, I think one of the biggest knocks that people had on him, he's got 31-inch arms. As an edge rusher, it doesn't really make sense how he's able to use any sort of length the way that he can. But I mean, he does that, as a rusher, converting speed to power. He's really able to kind of get his shoulders cocked a little bit and reduce his surface area and maximize that lack of anatomical length that he has to be able to push through guys. And the amount of, speed to power he's able to generate because he is so explosive and he's so tightly wound. I think that is kind of his superpower, is for being only 250 pounds. His strength is just out of this world.
He has a very strong base. That's one of the things that I've followed since the beginning of his career. All of his power comes from basically his legs, and he utilizes that leverage very well, especially when he's taking on blocks, being able to shed. Those arms aren't even an issue when it comes to, can you imagine if he had 33-inch, 33 to 34-inch arms?
Be insane.
Yeah, for sure. All right, now the next play I think that we have here, and this is just the Dallas Cowboys pass rush being the Dallas Cowboys pass rush. You're able to see at least they got 5 people lining up here on the line. They end up bringing all 5. Micah Parsons at least ends up drawing one-on-one coverage. He kind of takes that outside corner to be able to make sure that he's keeping contained on the quarterback. We saw the Cardinals defense struggle with keeping contained last week. But you just look at least with how they're able to collapse the pocket from the interior. And you're just seeing, I think, this all over the Cowboys film, is that it's not just Micah Parsons, it's not just Marcus Lawrence, but you see Jenkins is able to get a good off. They've got, I think this is number 99, I know at least that's
Golson.
Back there, at least too, with Golson. Yeah, he was a guy I really did like as far as for the defensive lineman. But this is just kind of a spot where if you're talking about quarterbacks and being able to play, there's not really any form of weakness that I can at least see offhand for the most part that you could even attack. With a quarterback like Zach Wilson, you do want to get the ball out quick. We'll show a quick clip of Dak doing that, at least on the offensive side. But here's a spot where you're looking at a lot of the guys down the field have dropped into at least some of that zone coverage with that. Looks like
man coverage, actually,
on that side. And everyone is basically covered, even the linebackers are in the right spot. We saw Arizona last week struggled a lot to get pressure on Daniel Jones in that second half, and he was able to run. Whereas I feel like that this is one of the places of not if they will, but how many sacks you will have, because Cardinals have a much better offensive line than the Jets. Jets have one of the worst. It still is one of the places of trying to figure out how you're going to attack this Cowboys defensive front, especially with, like we said, a maybe underrated but still struggling Cardinals offense. I'm just curious, at least, do you think that this is a place where the Cardinals are trying to just kind of stay alive, and then if they get down by a couple of scores, the Cowboys can pin their ears back and rush? What has been specifically good about the Cowboys this year. I think there's O'Diggy is the one I think who I see is actually gets the pressure in here. What's different about them this year than maybe last year or so? Whereas we're seeing just the Cowboys defense essentially be on another level from most all the other teams in the NFL right now, besides maybe the 49ers.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to last season. I think overall, I think the biggest difference is that they have added Stephon Gilmore to be that CB2. I think that, you saw last year, Anthony Brown got picked on a little bit. Anybody who was playing in that CB2 spot was getting picked on a little bit for the Dallas Cowboys. So that's not happening anymore. Which makes things very difficult for the offense because nobody is open and that defensive line is getting to them very quickly. And I think what you see from the Cowboys and what you see from Dan Quinn is getting guys put in the right position to make plays. I mean, you saw right there, they were playing a little bit of a stunt, and it wasn't just a single or a two-man stunt. It wasn't just a TE stunt. It was a full off twist where you had Osa Odigizua trying to slant into that guard, and then you had Golson also slanting for Hankins to come all the way around. So a little bit of a weird twist to have the slow guy going all the way around like that. But that's what Dan Quinn does, and he uses slants and stunts a bunch to get Micah Parsons free, because when you have Micah Parsons able to run and not get blocked, he just kind of teleports to the quarterback. We saw that on his sack, or one of his sacks, against the New York Jets. He kind of just came around up the middle and was right there for the sack. And that's what Dan Quinn does, is he puts these guys in a position to really put the pressure on these offensive linemen, make sure that their communication is good, make sure that their footwork is good, and that they are passing things off correctly. And it's really tough when you have a guy like Micah Parsons or a guy like Fowler, who are, on the quicker side of things, that can really move and make things difficult for those linemen in those situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one clip I know that you said have talked about teleporting, at least as far as Micah Parsons. Like, if you've been on Twitter at all, you've seen that clip at least, so we felt we need to show it. I did want to look at some of the offense that we've seen from the Cowboys, because Dak has gotten the ball out quick. We've been also able to see Tony Pollard be he's got, I think, the third most amount of carries in the league. But this is at least great protection against a good defensive front. You're able to see Dak essentially hit that soft spot between. Now, Sauce Gardner's here on the bottom. That's one of the places where you can see at least it's basically a mismatch, for Lamb is able to get open just before that safety hits. Beautifully placed ball by Dak Prescott as well. It does start up front with some of the protection. And again, this is like the Cowboys have always been noted for their offensive line. Zach Martin obviously had a bit of a holdout this year. He's been a stud. Tyron Smith looks like he's back healthy again. They actually get a former Texas Tech guy, I believe, at least at right tackle, who's done really well. But this is just one of those plays, at least, where it kind of sums up a lot of ways where we see, I think, in the next play, it's the quick passing game, but you're able to see Dak get time. The Cowboys, the protection starts up front. This is probably a play we'll see a lot if the Cardinals are unable to be able to get pressure with four, because Dak does a great job of being able to overall beat the blitz as a passer. And then I think this play is kind of the last one I think I wanted to check out with offense, which just kind of showcases just some of what they've had as far as with Tony Pollard. They're still running, I believe, is it a more gap scheme or more power scheme that they've run? Because I've seen a little bit of both this year, it seems like, in Dallas. But the one thing with Pollard is he's got more explosion than Zeke. Like, you can kind of see him get skinny and be able to have the ability to get up there. I feel like that if I had to predict for this game, the first half is going to be Cowboys making some explosive plays, and the second half just kind of running the ball with Pollard to grind it out. Because I don't know if Arizona's offense or defense has the ability to get a counterpunch in a game like this against Dallas, especially if Cowboys fans are like making this a home game in the Cardinals stadium,
which it probably will be.
Yeah, I've actually been really surprised at the amount of gap and power stuff that I've seen. I thought that the Cowboys were going to kind of shift more towards a zone style of offense, but when you do look at the offensive line that they have, guys like Tyron, guys like Zach, guys like Terrence, especially as a run blocker. Yeah. And then when Tyler Smith comes back at left guard, you have a really powerful, a really dominating type of offensive line. So the gap stuff kind of makes a lot more sense, because you're able to, kind of dictate your physicality against opponents. And when you have a guy like Tony Pollard, who is so explosive, if you have a little bit of a crease for him, he can really take off. And I think what's been interesting so far, Tony has gotten a lot of questions bones about the amount of touches that he has so far. I believe he has the most touches in the NFL overall, outside of Christian McCaffrey. And that is a huge, huge jump from the rest of his entire career, and a career that a lot of people thought that he could not do that. So they're proving that, and he's on the franchise tag, and they're probably not going to pay him. They're probably not going to tag him again. So they are going to use him and abuse him. And it's sad, and it sucks that, running backs have kind of been relegated to this type of life in the NFL. But I do think, maybe they jump out to an early lead, and then in the second half, you do see a little bit of a watered down defense that runs the football quite a bit. I think that they want to use Tony Pollard a lot. They want to see what kind of longevity he has for this season and how he holds up. But Malik Davis, Rico Dowdle, and
Rico
Dowdle. It's so tough because they legitimately had 4 running backs who I thought could all make the team and contribute. But Rico Dowdle is super explosive. He doesn't have the same type of lateral mobility that Tony has, but he explodes through the hole maybe even harder than Tony does. And then Deuce Vaughn comes in as a change of pace guy who really can make guys miss and can, kind of catch the ball out of the backfield. He had a little bit of a tough go of things in one target last week. But,
I was going to say, at least I know with pass pro, I know you also have probably your best pass protector is probably Tony Pollard, but I've seen them run him out on routes a lot more to be kind of that hot read for Dak. This is kind of a fun area of being able to see kind of when a quarterback can improvise some. You've got 5 people there. Obviously, it's a 1-on-1 with the running back against a linebacker, just a mismatch. And Dak is able to get away. He keeps his eyes at least downfield, and you're able to see him pick up a big gain with his legs. I don't like the big hit that he takes, but obviously that's one of the things that you can always say about quarterbacks is having some of that toughness or that ability to be able to make the plays. This is a spot where Kyler, being a baseball player, always would slide because he would protect himself as best as possible. So that's one of the complaints I think we've seen of people have had about him, is because he's very good at protecting himself and being smaller. Whereas Dak, it's not that he throws his body around a lot, but it's not like he's a Josh Allen type, at least. It's like, hurdling players. It's a very interesting type of place to be able to see exactly how good his mental game is, but like, when they get down to the red zone, his legs, being able to at least have Pollard down there, even seeing Jake Ferguson be able to emerge is kind of that target, which is a dynasty player who got Jake Ferguson a year ago, at least, is like been very happy to see. But the fact of the matter is, at least it feels like that this Cardinals team, when you're going to be looking at something like this in the Cowboys, this is almost a model, I would feel like, whether you have Kyler Murray or not. I would be trying to pursue something like this if I'm the Arizona Cardinals, of being able to have a top receiver, being able to run the ball effectively, having a good offensive line. This is something where I think at some point you would hope the Cardinals could end up being like the Dallas Cowboys, even if maybe not having the prestige. Like the team model, I think, is something you can build on.
Yeah, I kind of like the way that Detroit has built things over the last couple of years with their draft. The way that they've drafted, they've really tried to build the trenches. And I think that that's what good organizations normally try to do, is build in the trenches, build that offensive line, build that defensive line. I think that even though I am a new school chucking around kind of guy, I love defensive back play. That's kind of my thing. I do still believe that success and failure starts in the trenches. And I think that, at least with the Arizona Cardinals right now, I think that they're in a pretty good spot on that offensive line overall with what they have. And so I think that they can kind of build off of that and then build the defensive side of the ball. And I kind of, the way that I look at it is, draft, develop, pay your offensive guys. And then on the defensive side of the ball, because defense is so not sticky from season to season, you get those rentals like the Philadelphia Eagles have done with veteran guys late, in contract years, and just kind of stick things together and build it as you go. And then you obviously have, core players here and there on the defensive side of the ball, Budda Baker being one of them. But I think that that's kind of the model that NFL teams are going to try to go to.
I have a question when it comes to like the Cowboys building the trenches. That's something that they've been successful at being able to do. I do know that, like, especially on that Cowboys offensive line, you do have a couple of first rounders. So I'm not sure if you read the article by PFF about diminishing value. It has to do more so about like this graph that pertains to offensive linemen and what the value is, and where it like peaks is usually somewhere around, like, by their grading system, is like at the 70s. So if you have somebody playing at the 80s or at the 90s, you have somebody who's elite, you're really not getting much in return because you're having to pay those people elite money.
Mhm.
Whereas where you have somebody who's bad and you turn them into a solid to a good player, like someone who's grading around the 70s, meaning that they could hold for that three
Like Will
second timer.
Hernandez, great option
Yeah,
because he's a good and effective starter. Has been like so far one of their best offensive linemen next to Paris, and he's not on like a high paid contract as far as for that deal, which is interesting. Now I do think the exception for this, I'd say, of course, isn't a Tyron Smith, who's probably like top 3 left tackle in the National Football League for like almost all the time that he's been there, and on the
right.
field, it's been a game changer when he's in there. I feel like that's like maybe not the most valuable player, I would say, because that probably would end up being someone like Dak. But this is a very good Cowboys team that I think the Cardinals are looking at. Like if you end up paying a Paris Johnson someday, you need to make that initial investment. And the Cowboys have done an awesome job of finding those other offensive linemen, just like Marco said.
So like you guys have had that pipeline there. So with that, being able to keep all those players together, has there been any issues when it comes to like contracts and keeping that line? Because I know you guys have handed those big contracts also to players like Zeke Elliott. I'm not sure if CeeDee Lamb's extension has kicked in or anything yet, but obviously you're gonna keep him. You have Dak's big contract. So has there been any type of conflict between that? And of course, you have Micah Parsons, who you're going to have to pay.
Yeah, there hasn't really been many issues, particularly with the offensive line. When you look at the deals that they have done, Zach Martin's deal was very team friendly when he got his first deal done. Obviously, things have changed a little bit. They restructured things this year, but Tyron Smith's deal, it remains probably the best contract in the entire NFL with the way that they set it up. They've been able to move his money around and find space in other avenues because of the contract that they were able to get done with him. So they've gotten really lucky when it comes to the contracts on the offensive line. They just extended Terrence Steele as well at right tackle, and his contract, the original numbers that when it came out, they were like, oh, he's getting paid Mike McGlinchey numbers. That's kind of a lot. But with the way that the contract is structured, they can move money around and honestly get rid of him for pretty much nothing after 2 years. So the initial money is high, but he's playing well right now. And that money allows them to move money around to pay, guys like Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons is going to make probably $40 million by the time he gets paid. It's going to be insane.
Whew. I mean, if he had slid, we probably would have drafted him, and Vance Joseph would have played him behind Jordan Hicks. That's what because of the amount of times that this guy would not play any rookies, especially if they're top rated rookies. Oh, it just drove you nuts.
Oh yeah, no, that's definitely something I think the Cardinals fans are at least glad that we've been able to see a bit of confidence for this year.
And Denver's trying to get rid of him now.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, no, it's crazy. All right, let's go ahead. Thanks so much for your time today. Let's wrap it up with some score predictions, at least how this game will go. Cardinals, I believe, have opened up and are still currently as double-digit underdogs at 12.5 points. They have the point total set at 43 points. I think that we can agree the Cardinals are scrappy, but do you think that this is a place where can the Cardinals cover that spread overall? Because I think the joke that people always say is, good teams win games, but great teams cover the spread is kind of there. Can the Cowboys be able to beat the Cardinals by more than 2 touchdowns, do you think? Or is this a spot where the Cardinals may be able to kind of scrape together a bit of a, not quite losing by 14 points or so?
Man, that's tough.
Tough.
I don't like personally betting double-digit spreads, so I don't. But I think when I look at this game and when I look at how the Dallas Cowboys have handled business over the past couple of seasons against lesser opponents, I would find it hard to bet that the Cardinals can keep this game close in the final score. I think that maybe it stays close through 3 quarters, and then the Cowboys kind of do what the Giants did last week and kind of not pull away, but the Giants had to come all the way back. But I think that they can kind of pull away there at the end of the game and cover the spread. As you said, good teams win games, great teams cover the spread, and the Cowboys are, in my opinion, a top 2 team in the NFL. They're a great team, so they better cover.
Marcos, what do you think for the score in covering the spread, at least? Could the Cardinals be able to keep this like an 11-point game.
I think it's going to be 24-14. So I think what's going to happen is it's going to start out slow, at least in the first quarter, second quarter. The Cowboys might score like a touchdown, maybe a field goal. It'll be 10-0. And then when they come back from half, the Cardinals might muster something up to be able to get themselves a score or two. And then the Cowboys are just going to take it at the end. I'd hate to say I don't want the Cowboys to win, but it's just the reality of the circumstance of what's going on with the Cardinals, and it's a prediction. So
Yeah, I have, at least with Arizona this week. Buddha's still out. I have this being a game where the Cowboys do cover the spread. I think that, though, it may end up being closer than we think, where I think in the beginning of the game, Cowboys are able to kind of get up early on Arizona with like maybe a 24-7 type of a game. And then maybe Arizona's able to put something together like in the third quarter, but we have not seen Josh Dobbs be able to perform in the fourth quarter. So originally I wrote down the Cardinals with a backdoor cover, and then I looked at the fourth quarters the last 2 weeks and just crossed that out where I was like, no, I don't think so. It just feels like this is the Cardinals team that's running into a buzzsaw, and I do think that they'll probably perform better than like a 30-10 type of game, but I have it being like a 27-14 type of game that I see, where I think that the Cowboys, at least for the most part, are able to cover. It's pretty close, but just because if it was the case for the Arizona Cardinals with facing such a ferocious, they did well against Washington in the pass rush, but they forced 3 turnovers. And then you got to feel, unless this is a like 3 interception random thing that pops up from Dak, I'm right now with where Cardinals are without Buda Baker. I feel like I've got that as being a place where Arizona's maybe able to get some stuff up in the second half. But I think that the Cowboys are going to find it a lot easier, at least to move, than maybe a team like the Giants in the first half with Daniel Jones and the Washington with Sam Howell, just because there's a lot of respect I have, at least for Dak Prescott as a QB.
I like it. I didn't give a score prediction, but I probably should, right? I'm gonna go with 30-17. I think that
Ooh.
late the Arizona Cardinals, they kind of go back and forth in the fourth quarter. Each kind of get a late touchdown, and Cowboys score 30, and then the Cardinals, I think, have a win with scoring 17 against this defense.
scoring 3 would be a win because we do better than the Giants did.
Oof.
Yep.
There you go. Awesome. Hey, thanks so much for joining us, Dalton. Let us throw in know where we can follow you, kind of see some of your content. Is you don't just cover the Cowboys, but you cover quite a bit, at least around the NFL.
I do. I cover the NFL. I cover the NFL draft now. You know, they really have me working absolutely to the bone over at PFN. So you can follow me on Twitter or X or whatever you guys want to call it at Dalton B. Miller. That's where you can find me on all of my social media platforms.
Fantastic. Yeah, we'll be reaching out to you as far as when the draft comes closer, because that's what us Cardinals fans are rooting for, unfortunately, as it comes to this year. Thank you again for joining us. You can follow me and Marcos at BlakeMurphy7 at Pancake Soul. And make sure you're following the Redbird Reboot. It's spelled that same way on Twitter/X as well. Thank you guys so much again. And this has been the Redbird Reboot. It's time for us to be able to log off.